Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Single Malt Strategy Podcast. This is episode 18, and my name is Matt. With me today, our co-host, Jean. How are you doing today, Jean?
Not bad, man. How you doing?
Doing better now that I stopped tripping over myself on these intros. Today, we're going to be talking about, I think, a topic that we've talked about a little bit indirectly and on several of the episodes in the past, and that's the American Civil War. But we're going to be doing something we haven't done, really, I don't think, except for maybe the first episode, where we talk about some of our favorite games within the American Civil War genre. So we've definitely talked about Ultimate General Civil War a bit on these episodes. I believe we've also talked about Ultimate General Gettysburg, and maybe a touch or two about sid-meiers-gettysburg. But I thought it would be interesting. I'm in the process of working on a video for my channel, looking at what I view are my top 5 Civil War games of all time. And I thought I'd, pick your brain a bit to see what your thoughts are as well. It's an interesting topic in American history that gets a lot of attention. Outside of maybe World War II, I would guess it's kind of the most interested. I don't know if that's the right way of phrasing it, but kind of the topic that gets the most attention in American military history anywhere seems to be probably World War II is number 1, and then the Civil War is number 2. But
I wonder if you kind of stack them like back to back, if you put like the top most popular, I would probably say World War II is on top. But I'm trying to think if you kind of like put in all the wars that's on this in the world, would like I'm kind of like thinking, would Napoleon kind of like sneak its way into the second?
Not in the U.S. Maybe in Europe. I've heard that there's a very large following of Napoleonic enthusiasts in Europe, but I mean, Americans really don't. It's a handful of people I feel like who are interested in Napoleonics in the U.S. I'm sure it's not insignificant, but when you compare it to other conflicts in the U.S., I don't think it's anything similar. I also think that it'd be interesting to compare interests in conflicts based on age ranges, because I feel like the Civil War is and maybe this is just sort of the lull after the 150th, but I kind of feel like it's losing its I don't know if appeal is the right word, but losing some of its fan base. I think, growing up, it always seemed to be people who were really into the Civil War tended to be middle-aged to a little bit older, and I feel like that interest base hasn't really been replenished. I'm not sure if it's just because World War II is the easy good war to sell as being, every other video game is basically a World War II video game. And especially still to this day, World War II has living veterans, which obviously the Civil War does not. And a lot of people's, parents or grandparents were all World War II, veterans, or they were alive around that time period. So it has a closer connection with American society than the Civil War does. The Civil War for a long time was romanticized in the United States for better, or well, probably not for better, probably for worse. But it's one of those topics that has had a lot of attention over the years, but seems to be slipping a bit in terms of people's interest in the actual conflict and games that come out about that conflict. But
you think that's because like all the stuff going on today, like with the I guess with all the stuff in the papers and all the controversy and
no, I think that started well before any of that. I think the Civil War, in my view, has kind of been on the decline. If I had to guess, and this is my own perception of a young 30-year-old who has no real historical vision going very far back, but to me, it really felt like if you look at movies that came out, if you look at games that came out, the 90s was almost the peak of Civil War, at least pop culturalism in many ways. And, the last 20 or so years, I think there's been a steady decline. I don't know if that was because you had, Gettysburg come out as a movie, you had sid-meiers-gettysburg, you had Civil War Generals come out. There were a bunch of games that were very well selling. There were several movies that came out. I believe Glory came out in the 90s as well. I could be wrong. But there were a lot of different pop cultural pieces that came out in the 90s, and I don't know if that was trailing interest. People were interested, therefore it came out, or if it came out and it spurred interest. But in either case, To me, it seems to have been declining over the last 20 or so years, even with the 150th anniversary occurring. But what do I know? I'm not really in the pop culture scene at all. That's not really the focus of this episode, though. The focus of the episode is going to be talking more specifically about our favorite Civil War games of all time. But before we do that, as usual, what have you been playing lately, Jean?
So I started playing today Field of Glory. I believe Field of Glory 2. That's the name. I can look it up here. But I've been playing that. I've been playing some iOS games. Unfortunately, a couple of them have been taken out, so I'm not too happy with that because I don't know if you all noticed, but if you upgrade to iOS 11 and you bought some strategy games, some of them don't work anymore because iOS 11's all 64-bit. So I'd say like a quarter of the games that I have on it don't work anymore. Some great games like Command of the Great War, which is one of my always go-to iOS strategy games. So I've been playing Starbase Orion instead. Thankfully, that's 64-bit, so I get to play that a little bit. The cool thing that iOS 11 has is I can record games straight from the iPad and iPhone now. That's a really cool feature that they added in. Let's see what else. On the desktop, I think it's only Field of Glory. I've been playing Battlestar Galactica, of course. I've been playing a lot of skirmish modes, but those are pretty much the main games. I've been really on my iPad lately because I've been running around from the fire departments at school to all this other stuff. So it's getting home to get on the computer is not it's not been easy.
It wouldn't be a single malt strategy episode if it wasn't you talking about mobile games, more specifically Apple. Although I am surprised to hear you criticize Apple, which is not something I've heard you do before. With regards to their handling of 32 to 64-bit games.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing what they did. I'm not happy that some of the games that I bought I can't play again unless downgrade, which is a long, lengthy process, and Apple's going to tell you shouldn't do that or you can't do that. But I don't know. I understand we got to move forward, and these devices that we have in our hand, like the iPhone 8, is actually more powerful than most laptops that we have. The Geekbench score on there is over 10,000, so it's better than some gaming laptops that are out there. But I would love an emulation environment where I could still play those 32-bit apps because I paid for them. So well, at least I paid for some of them, not all of them, but paid for some of them, and I would like to get on them. And I don't know. I worry that in a couple of years, the 64-bit is going to move on to a different type of chipset, and we're going to have to buy a whole new set of games. And the thing that I worry about is developers that made and publishers that made games like Command of the Great War and a few others. They didn't see this coming. No one really saw this coming. It was just it was kind of hey, by the way, this 32-bit apps are not going to be supported. So a lot of developers well, I made a bunch of these games, and I wish they would have made an emulation environment for iOS. It would have been awesome. But, I guess every company has its reasons for doing it, for better or for worse. I don't know Apple's reasons for it. I'm assuming it's for a good reason.
I can guess. I think, first of all, obviously them moving to 64-bit makes sense. They've had a 64-bit operating system for a while now. But if I had to guess, the cynical side of me would say they're basically thinking, okay, developers who are still running 32-bit applications and who aren't making enough money to support, which is not an insignificant effort to essentially architect their games or their applications to 64-bit, they don't really care if they lose them. And the real benefit for them is the fact that now they can just wipe out all... The App Store is inundated with crap, right? So the logic would be, if you do this kind of a requirement, you can basically weed out 90% of the spam-type apps that you have out there because they're not going to be making enough money to justify completely recoding. And therefore, you can whittle down your App Store to a more reasonable figure with more likely value-added products rather than just shovelware.
But I figured it wouldn't... wasn't there like even during the keynotes, like back in the day, they were always saying like our app store is now at like 2 million apps, and they were always kind of projecting like, hey, we're now at 2.5 million apps, 3 million apps, and so on and so on. I figured they would want more apps in the app store so they can use that as PR.
Yeah, but they don't care about that anymore because it used to be a differentiator between them and Android. But now Android has just as many, if not more, and granted, a lot of those are also shovelware. So you kind of, in the earlier days, I think you saw a lot of people saying, well, iOS has all the apps and Android doesn't, but that differentiator is kind of gone, so now that doesn't matter as much. And if someone does come back and say, well, yeah, Google has more apps, it can be like, yeah, but 90% or whatever of our apps are supported, and however many percentage of their apps are shovelware. Like, there's a response now that there didn't used to be. And I can understand if that is their approach. I don't know. I'm just assuming. But if that's at least part of their motivation, it makes some sense. The unfortunate thing is, strategy games don't tend to sell terribly well compared to other genres, and the odds of it making sense to completely recode a game that's over 6 or 7 years old, like Commander of the Great War, just doesn't make a lot of sense. And it's frustrating, too. I mean, I hear the frustration in your voice. I'm frustrated, too, not because I've been affected by this, but just sort of over time, that losing of the ability to play games or programs or that you used to really enjoy. I've, as part of this episode, I was trying to look into, hey, how do I reinstall Sid-Meiers-Gettysburg? I still have an original copy of Sid-Meiers-Gettysburg that I played over a decade ago. Oh my goodness, it might have been 2 decades ago or close to. Shortly after it came out, I remember going to the store, seeing this game on the shelf and being, oh my God, there's a game about Gettysburg. And I'm like 13 at the time or something to that effect. And I buy it, knowing that I don't have a computer that can run this thing. I just bought a game that I can't play. And so we buy this game, or I buy this game, and that same night, we have a sleepover at one of my friend's house down the street who has a computer that can run the game. And we play the Battle of Gettysburg, from like 7 o'clock all the way through to like 3 or 4 in the morning when, I think we're playing as the Confederates. I can't quite remember. When we win Pickett's Charge. We follow very closely the historical battles, which we'll talk a little bit more about this game later, but that's not necessarily all how the battle always plays out. But you play through the battle, I fight Pickett's Charge, I win Pickett's Charge. I'm sure it's on like lower difficulty, and it's 3 in the morning. And it was awesome. It was an awesome experience because I'm there playing, but so is my friend, and he has an N64 with Zelda Ocarina of Time. So like we're going back and forth. Like one of us is playing Zelda, the other one's playing Sid Meier's Gettysburg, and just the cutscenes, the way the whole game worked. It was a great experience. And so in preparation for this episode, I wanted to come out and I wanted to play that game and give it a go. And I know one of the interesting things I think is there's always this debate you see going back and forth in the console wars. Like, oh, the PC is so much more flexible, can do all these different things, and blah, 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 blah. And console players a lot of times will say, yeah, but it'll just work for me. And while that argument tends not to carry a lot of weight for PC people, maybe it should if you're interested in longevity. Because I've got a regular Nintendo in the other room with Mario 3 and Super Mario Brothers 3, 2, 1. I don't know why I went in that order. The original Zelda, several old classic games. If I want to play those games, I literally just have to walk into the other room, plug the cartridge into the system, maybe blow on it a little bit to make it work, but it will work.
Those days.
And and those games are from the early 90s, right? So if I want to run Sid Meier's Gettysburg, Windows has unless you have the 32-bit version of Windows 10 or 7 or whatever, Windows has no support for 16-bit applications on Windows 10 or on Windows 7 for that matter. They had a support for 16-bit subsystems if you had a 32-bit version of Windows XP and you upgraded it to Windows 7, then you had some support there. But if you buy a brand new computer with a 64-bit operating system and you want to play an old game that you have for 20 plus years, and I know this is a really, really first world problem thing. Like, oh my goodness, I can't play games from 30 years ago. But if you want to play that game, there's no support. So you have to set up a virtual machine with another installation of Windows And compatibility mode won't do anything for this game because it is a 16-bit application. I was able to get it installed through a couple of workarounds, but I can't run it. And now I'm going to have to figure out how to do it's just a headache worth of work because I really do want to play it. I think it's worth it. And you see similar.
You're going to eventually have to have like 3 laptops. You're going to have your normal laptop. You're going to have a laptop runs Windows 7. Another laptop runs XP.
Well, I'm pretty sure I just need some partitions. I don't need multiple machines to have a different or a virtual machine running a different version of the operating system. I sure hope not. Anyway, I've never done this, and I'm certainly not computer illiterate, but I'm not super techie. So, it's just one of those things that. Kind of a headache for an old classic game that I want to play, and it'd be a heck of awesome if the game was supported. I can't complain too much that Microsoft doesn't support an operating system that hasn't been around for 20 years, but it's still one of those things where it's like, if this was an NES game, I wouldn't have this issue. But
the one thing that we got to be grateful for is the developers that come forward and say, look, I miss playing that game. I don't want to make a virtual machine and run sid-meiers-gettysburg. I want to bring sid-meiers-gettysburg to the future. And because of that, we have Ultimate General Gettysburg and Ultimate General Civil War, which, I feel is kind of like the modern equivalent of what Sid Meier's would have made today.
Well, why don't we touch on that? So, the topic today is to talk about the games that we think are the best Civil War games of all time. And why don't you start going down your list? Give me one of your top Civil War games of all time.
I'll go from 5 to 1. So I'll build some suspense. Okay. All right.
Do you actually have 5?
I actually do have 5, yeah. But 4 and 5 are kind of like the same thing. So, well, a little bit. So number 5 is going to be Ultimate General Gettysburg, right? Because it's an awesome game. It's I always feel like it's Sid Meier's Gettysburg for the modern era. It's what he would have made. So that's number 5 right on the map. Number 4, I would have to say it's Ultimate General Civil War. So
before I don't want to just rush through the list and say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What makes it number 5?
I would say when it came out, which was a few years ago, the graphics on it it was very reminiscent. It's kind of like if you would have took, from what I remember of Sid Meier's Gettysburg, it felt like they took that exact real-time environment and the simplicity of moving units, and they kind of just said, all right, let's take the exact way this game runs. Let's improve all the graphics. Let's improve the animations and make a great Gettysburg game. And they besides the graphics, they did other things like I believe the one thing I'm trying not to get this confused with Ultimate General Civil War because that's pretty much what I've been playing lately most of the time. They added I would say the cool thing that I did like is in Ultimate General Gettysburg, you get to move brigade. So it's a lot more, I would say, easier to move forces around because I don't know if our audience has played Sid Meier's Gettysburg, and there was this one scenario I remember in Ultimate Sid Meier's Gettysburg that I played, and it's a 3-day scenario. It literally is like you start at 5 p.m. one day and you'll go to 5 p.m. the next day, a whole full 24 hours playing this scenario. And you pick, either side. And the only thing is it's all regimental based. You have, the 114th New York or the 110th Pennsylvania. I'm not sure even if that unit was there, but you have all these regiments in the game. And it's literally hundreds of them that you're moving. So, and it's real time. So you're kind of like moving guys around. You're like, okay, I gotta move this brigade. And you're flipping around. Your mouse is like literally breaking your fingers, and your mom is in the other room banging on your door. Says, "What is all that clicking?" And you're like literally pulling your hair out because you're like,
God, what experience did you have with that game? Wow. The regimental piece was the best, one of the better parts about it when you compare it to Ultimate General Gettysburg. I don't like the brigade setup in Ultimate General Gettysburg.
But in Ultimate General Civil War, I think that they kind of perfected it where you could break up a brigade and then recompile it together.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, I mean, you could set skirmishers out. I'm trying to remember if you could actually break up a brigade, but yeah, no, I think it's fair to say that Ultimate General is definitely a spiritual successor to Sid Meier's. I think the thing that's the biggest similarity is that dynamic campaign within the Battle of Gettysburg. The ability to start the battle, and then depending on what happens. So, Ultimate General Gettysburg, which we haven't talked a lot about on this podcast. We've talked a lot about Ultimate General Civil War, but we really haven't talked much about Ultimate General Gettysburg. Ultimate General Gettysburg is, in principle, if you play the campaign as either the Union or the Confederates, you get an initial battle, which is something like the attack on Hare's Ridge or McPherson's Hill when the Union cavalry is defending, but then the infantry is coming up to support. And you've got General Heath, the commander of the lead division of Hill's Corps for the Confederate Army, advancing on those troops. And the engagement occurs, and you fight the battle. And if the Union does what they did historically, which is hold the Confederates off, then the next scenario you have that you can fight is more or less historical. If the Confederates win and they drive the Union off the position, then the next battle, I believe, is the battle for Seminary Ridge, which is not historical. It's hypothetical. That attack does occur later in the day at the actual battle, but not at that time. So you can have an evolving battle where you drive the Union back and you take Cemetery Hill on day one of the Battle of Gettysburg. You can have it go the other way, where the Confederates fail so badly they get pushed back, and you have alternate battles. And I think that game even goes into July 4th, even has some battles on July 4th. So it's a scripted scenario-based game with dynamic trees determining what scenarios occur. So it's not a purely dynamic campaign, but it is very close to that because there's like 30 or 40 different battles that you can fight within the Battle of Gettysburg, and it can lead to a number of different outcomes. The thing that, and I don't have Ultimate General Gettysburg on my list, but that's because I could only come up with 4 battles or 4 games that would make up my top 5 list. So, if I was to add a 5th, it would probably be Ultimate General Gettysburg. The thing that pulls back on me from comparing it with Sid Meier's Gettysburg, is just the production value. And the game looks great. It's a sprite-based game, which is actually very reminiscent of how Sid Meier's Gettysburg was. But the thing that pulls me back from Ultimate General Gettysburg is, while everything looks fine, and while it's about what I would expect for a game today, if you look at Sid Meier's Gettysburg and you compare it, they had video cutscenes, which, okay, whatever, a lot of games in the 90s did. But then they had this animated map briefing type setup, which was very polished, very well done, and really drew you into the battle to make you feel like you were a general participating in this battle with discussions going on between 2 different generals. And that, to me, really is what put that game over the top, because Sid Meier's Antietam was the sequel to Gettysburg. It didn't have that, and I did not have the same affinity with that game as I did with Gettysburg. Gettysburg felt like a movie that I was partaking in, and that was dynamic. Ultimate General Gettysburg does not. It just feels like a lot of linked scenarios that are really interesting.
Yeah, I remember those cutscenes. Damn, that was so long ago. Now I'm looking at one of the screenshots now, and it just kind of hit me. Wow. Yeah, those were really great. So Antietam didn't have it.
No, Antietam did not. And Antietam was very structured very differently. But we'll talk about that because, as I'm assuming you can guess, Ultimate General or Sid Meier's Gettysburg is on my list of top games. But we'll talk about that one a little bit later because it's a little bit higher on my list.
So after Ultimate General Gettysburg, which was number 5, of course, number 4 would be Ultimate General Civil War. And I chose that primarily because it did a few things right that I really love. One being that the intuitiveness of moving large groups of forces. Like when you're moving to actually say, all right, I want to move this brigade is easy. You take one brigade, you move it to the left or right, or even moving 5 regiments out of a brigade is easy. But when you have an army of 70, 80,000 men with 5 brigades here, another 5 brigades in another division, and another corps over there, it becomes literally almost a nightmare to move them in a constantly evolving battlefield. And I feel like Game Labs, the developer and publisher of this game, perfected the user interface on moving large groups of troops. I mean, I could literally just select a corps and actually draw a line where I want them to go, and the computer does it all. And it's so intuitive. I mean, I don't even think you can make it better than the way it is. I think the guy who made this scenario, he probably went to sleep one night, says, I got it, woke up in the middle of the night, this is perfect, this is the way it should be, and, it came to him in a dream or something like that, because this is perfect. And so I really love that. The only thing I feel like this game is missing is, and I've mentioned this in a couple of reviews that I made for this game, was that, I don't like, I would love to play the whole Gettysburg game from start to finish, from July 1st to July 3rd, a complete sandbox. And Sid Meier's had that. It was one of the scenarios I was mentioning before. But also, there are a lot of times where I don't want to go from, day one and start with Buford and then go to Seminary Ridge. And sometimes I just want to play the wheat field. Sometimes I just want to play Little Round Top. And you can't do that. You have to go according to this scripted, you have to do this, then you have to do that. And I don't know. I feel like,
Is that true? I thought you could do just like a pickup battle.
I've looked in I don't know if about 2-3 weeks ago, I went in it and they added some custom battles, I think like Pickett's Charge, and added like 1 or 2 more. But it wasn't there in the initial release. And there's a few other ones missing, like that I wanted to play, but I forgot which ones. But they're starting to add little by little. I know I think Little Round's Top's in there. I know Pickett's Charge is in there. They added that. So slowly they're adding these custom battles, but, I wish they would either give me the whole sandbox of Gettysburg or, make mini battles of that battle. If you want to play, how you call it, the wheat field and, the Third Corps' defense of Day 2, or Little Round Top, or Culp's Hill, make mini battles out of it, or just give me a sandbox of it. And that was the only thing that I didn't like about the game. Otherwise, overall, I think the game was a great tactical experience for a game. I think it's Sid Meier's Gettysburg times 2. This would be the sequel to Sid Meier's Gettysburg. This would be Sid Meier's Gettysburg 2.
Which one? Ultimate General Gettysburg or Civil War?
Civil War.
Yeah, Civil War to me is almost more like Civil War Generals 2 in some sense. So I think I don't want to belabor the point too much on Ultimate General Civil War because we've talked about it like 10 different times on this podcast. But what I will say is that, while Ultimate General Gettysburg is a dynamic link of individual scenarios within the Battle of Gettysburg, Ultimate General Civil War takes you out and says, okay, here's the American Civil War, here's 20 or so different battles that you can fight. Some of them are major, some of them are minor. And as you fight, you build up this cadre of an army of yours. You build up your army, you get promoted, you can make your army larger, and you build an attachment with these different units within your army. So essentially, you start off with a couple of units, you fight through, they gain experience, you have to replace your losses, you build new brigades, you have to equip the forces, you have limits on how much you can equip certain weapons, limits based on how much money you have, limits based on how many weapons are available in the first place, and then you go back into the next battle in this tree of battles, and you fight that battle, and again, based on those results, you've got to replace your losses, sometimes you want to build more units, etc., etc., sometimes you want to upgrade commanders, upgrade weapons. The bit that doesn't feel like Ultimate General Gettysburg or Sid Meier's Gettysburg is there's really no dynamism in there. You play battle to battle on a strict script. The enemy may be stronger or weaker based on how the previous fight went, but you're still going to fight the next battle in line no matter what, with I think 2 exceptions. The Battle of Fort Stevenson toward the end of the Union campaign, and There's one other battle. I think it's the one after Chancellorsville. There's one other battle, I believe, that comes only if you win or lose or something to that effect. But in general, there's no dynamism. It's just a strict tree of battles that you fight. You build your forces up, and it's almost like an RPG to some extent in the way that it manages that. And I enjoy the game. It's a lot of fun, but to me, it's a lot more arcadey than Sid Meier's. It's a lot more arcadey than the Scourge of War games. Troops don't really move in a realistic looking fashion. They kind of run or sprint across the map and in weird shapes or whatever. It just, to me, it's a fun game that takes some of the important tactics of the Civil War, like flanking and the way you use your artillery, but it's not a true Civil War experience if you're trying to get that out of the fighting. And the campaign is just kind of a scripted campaign. I love the game. It's on my list at number 4, but I have some reservations about it. Just sort of the repetitiveness that you get in those campaigns where everything's kind of the same battle to battle, and really it's kind of about min-maxing how you set up or build your forces. That's fine. But to me, it loses a bit of its authenticity there, while still being a really, really good game that I've played like 90 episodes worth on my channel. There's just certain reservations that I have about it.
And I completely agree with you. I believe that if they make Ultimate General Civil War, 2 or whatever, or 3, whatever, the next iteration of this game, they need to concentrate on the strategic portion. Don't go from battle to battle to battle. Make it, like you said, dynamic, where I can move the army of Northern Virginia. Instead of fighting the Battle of Gettysburg, I decide to do something else, and, not to go to Maryland or, I want to maybe go north to Philadelphia or, to go to New York. I want to create a different type of Gettysburg. I want different terrain. I want a rapidly changing environment where I'm not saying, well, I'm playing Chancellorsville again. Well, I'm playing Fredericksburg again. I mean, it's great to revisit those battles, but I want to make, and I'm sure a lot of people want to make their own Gettysburg, their own, high watermark of the Confederacy or the Union or whatever it may be.
I think I would counter that and say I'm not necessarily saying that. What I'm saying is that if you're going to do a linked group of scenario, if you want to have a dynamic campaign in the way that Sid Meier's Gettysburg or Ultimate General Gettysburg do it, then you need a tighter focus on one battle where you can build 30 or 40 different scenarios so you can really address all those different outcomes. If you're going to do a battle, a grand I wouldn't call it a grand strategy game, but if you're going to do an entire Civil War with linked battles, it loses a little bit of its appeal when you crush the enemy at Chancellorsville and, there's the whole enemy army almost in the same shape a week later at the Battle of Gettysburg. There's no feeling that what you do matters other than the end result of you winning the game. And Ultimate General Gettysburg and Sid Meier's Gettysburg have that feel of you did great, therefore the next battle is different, or you did great, therefore the enemy is weaker in the next fight. Maybe one of the weaknesses of Ultimate General Gettysburg is that if you hit the enemy really hard on day 1 and day 2, they're so devastated they have no troops left. You're going to win day 3 by default. And, that's realistic in the sense that the army would be destroyed, whereas, at Ultimate General Civil War, if you crush the enemy at 2nd Manassas and you wipe out the entire Union army, all those same guys show up at Antietam just a few days later.
Yeah, that does offer, that's a little bit. That's a little odd. Now, going to the third part of my list, because since we're going back and forth between Sid Meier's Gettysburg and Ultimate General, that would be number 3 on my list, the Sid Meier's Gettysburg game from back in the 90s. I'm looking at some of the screenshots here, and I'm kind of like looking at them, and I'm actually kind of impressed about how the quality this game was when it first came out. Because looking at these graphics, when I had a computer running this, I also had a Sega Genesis. And I remember when even the Sega Genesis was like really horrible. So I'm like, geez, man, for the 90s, this was actually pretty good graphics.
Yeah, it came out in 1997 and was very successful. I want to say they said they sold over 200,000 copies in the first year and a half that it came out, which doesn't sound like a lot to us today, but for a PC game, for a war game, selling that many copies back then, that was pretty substantial. And that was... Sorry?
Do you remember how much you paid?
I have no recollection whatsoever. But then remember also, so they sold those copies as a standalone game. Then it spurred a sequel, Sid Meier's Antietam, and then after that they bundled Sid Meier's Antietam and Gettysburg together in like this classic Wargamers package. And actually it was really interesting because for years afterwards, like even into 2004, 2005, I remember going into stores like Target or Best Buy and seeing like Wargamers collection, and Sid Meier's Gettysburg was always in there. You know, it was always one of the headliners of like a 20 or like 10 game pack, and it would always be part of that. So, you know, this is one of those games that to me seems to have kind of passed into the cultural memory of great classic games. You know, I know Three Moves Ahead, another strategy podcast, has talked about this game multiple times. It's one of those games that I think people just remember. And I already mentioned kind of my story of buying it, not having a PC for it, and kind of co-opting that friend down the street of mine so we could play it all night. I did that to the friend who lived across the street. We ended up playing that, not in the same way all night, but ended up going over there so we could play there. Like I felt, in retrospect, I was a horrible kid. You know, I was using friends who had better computers than me so I could play this game. But they ended up enjoying it too, and neither of them was in any way remotely a history buff, in any way remotely a war gamer. Not at all. Like they played NBA Jam, they played Madden. None of them had another war game ever in their collection, and to this day they do not play war games. But they enjoyed that game. They had a good time, and I think a lot of that comes down to, one, the simplicity of the user interface. Two is the production value. Again, those video clips of the reenacting at the start or end of the days, you know, the way the game takes place is it builds this, it has this video of various Civil War reenactment stuff. You have some voiceover at the start of the campaign, giving you the situation as either the Union or the Confederates, and it builds a little bit of ambiance, but that's not really where the special piece of its presentation comes. That comes after that video. That comes before every battle. You get a map, an old-timey looking map of Gettysburg. And you get these little block, you know, blue block or red block units that move back and forth on the map that are represented by divisions. And you hear a voiceover of, you know, at the start of the battle for the Confederates, you hear General Hill talk, A.P. Hill, commander of the Confederate Third Corps, talking to Harry Heath, his division commander, about how he wants to go to Gettysburg. And they show this, you know, icon moving toward Gettysburg and this blue icon. And then it kind of zooms in. And then you've got the pre-battle introduction, which is always very well done as well. It would tell you what your best brigade is. It would give you some explanation on how you use your artillery. Are they rifled guns? Are they smoothbore guns? You know, that voice that you hear, just, you know, these are smoothbore guns. They're good for close range work or something like that. This is your best brigade. These troops have some experience. These kind of things that tell you about the battle before it even takes place. They give you a little bit of a briefing that if you're a commander, you should know. And it kind of puts you in the shoes of that general. And then the battle occurs, and then you go back to that briefing map, and what just happened on the map you see, or what just happened on the battlefield, you see happen on the map. If you break those Union troops, all of a sudden that strong line of Union troops turns into these small little dots of blue that are moving east away from you, and then more units come up, and more of your units come up, and the situation can change dynamically. You can, you know, by the end of the battle, if you fight the Confederates really well, you can be established along a defensive position along Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, and the enemy's attacking you to try and open up their supply lines. Otherwise, they're going to be trapped. You can have the option of trying to convince General Lee, if you're playing as a Confederate, to don't do Pickett's charge. You get this whole briefing that explains Pickett's charge. Lee's saying, I'm going to attack him in the center. General Longstreet pleading with him, as I'm sure, you know, happened historically based on what we know. You know, don't attack there. Let me go around their right. Let me take Pickett around the right. And you get that choice of, do you want to do Pickett's charge? Do you want to attack on the right? And if you attack on the right, you principally face the Union Sixth Corps, which really didn't play a part in the battle other than filling in a lot of gaps or whatnot after, you know, the fighting had mostly erupted and occurred on July 2nd. The Sixth Corps was largely parceled out as a reserve, didn't get heavily engaged, but you have a scenario there where you can engage on the right. It's a brilliantly put together game that looks like a AAA game, feels like a AAA game of the time. The storytelling is immaculate, and the ability to have a very a lot of replayability because of the way these linked scenarios worked. It's just very well done. And at the same time, it was one of those early games where I didn't play a lot of online gaming. To this day, I really still don't. But I remember playing hours and hours, and this was years after the game was super popular, so there weren't a ton of people, but playing hours on GameSpy, like with different quasi-clans that would fight, with multiple people. You could have 3 or 4 people on your side, 3 or 4 people on the other side. I'd get a division, he'd get a division, the other guy would get a division, and you'd each be commanding these different units in an online multiplayer game, which was a lot of fun. Like, there were only a couple of games I ever did that growing up with. And Sid-Meiers-Gettysburg was one of them, and Age of Sail 2 was the other one. So, that, to me, I guess because it's your number 3, it's going to spoil my number 1. But Sid-Meiers-Gettysburg is the best Civil War game of all time.
Wow. So you're going to put that as number 1?
No doubt about it.
Wow. So even what game so you're saying, like, let me ask you something. If they put those kind of like cinematic,
it's 20 years after its release, and I'm going to set up a virtual machine at some point in the next week so I can play it. That should tell you how I feel about it if the last 10-minute rant didn't.
Well, I'm curious if, like, Game Labs, before they released Ultimate General Gettysburg or Civil War, they took that same cinematic feel and they included that part that you were just mentioning, and they put that into Ultimate General Gettysburg and Civil War. Would that have been your number 1? Would that have been the missing link?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think part of it, in all honesty, part of it's also a bit of nostalgia, for what the game meant to me at the time versus maybe what it would mean to me today. But I'll tell you, when I was playing a lot of Ultimate General Gettysburg when that first came out, that thing got darn close. So maybe. I think about it.
I wonder if Game Labs is listening to this, that would be a really cool thing to do it. Like, now that you mentioned the cinematic thing, that pops right in my head. I'm like, man, I remember how cool that was. Because,
but it was more than just that too. Like, I was trying to get across the fact that the way that they open the scenario, where they tell you this is your best brigade, where they tell you these guys are have experience, rifled guns, these are good for long range work, smoothbore guns, these are good for short ranges or close ranges. Like, the way that they presented not just the pre-battle cinematics, but also the way they introduce you to the fight. They tell you what you need to know really quickly, really succinctly. You know what your brigade that you're going to need to rely on in a crisis is. You know what type of artillery pieces you have. You know a lot about the battle before it even takes place. And frankly, those are the kind of things that you shouldn't have to read through a scenario briefing to find out. You shouldn't have to pause the game and go around for 10 minutes looking around at all your different units and trying to evaluate in yourself. If you're the commander of these forces, you should already know this, and the game tells it to you. And the voice acting was brilliant in this game too. Like, they did not spare any expense in this game. They made the best game they could make at the time.
I wonder what their budget was.
It was impressive.
Yeah, I wonder how. He definitely put a lot of attention into it. So
yeah, they didn't have that, and that's one of the things that pulled me away from Sid Meier's Antietam is, and maybe those elements of dynamic battles and sort of high production value doesn't work as well on a single day battle like the Battle of Antietam. But the Battle of Antietam wasn't anywhere. It was okay. We basically give you 20 new scenarios, no intros, no explanations, just here's 20 scenarios, you can play them, and that was really it. There was no production value behind it. It was just a list of scenarios with some write ups about them, and you could play them. And I don't even remember if the campaign played through in order of the battle, or I think it was really just like one. They had one giant scenario, which was awesome. You could play the whole battle in one day. Which actually, you mentioned you could do that in Gettysburg, but you couldn't originally. That came out with one of the patches later on. One of the things with Sid Meier's Gettysburg is they had a first day scenario, they had a second day scenario, and then they had Pickett's Charge. But they didn't have one grand 3-day scenario until I think it was the XP patch, or maybe when Antietam came out.
I wonder if it was a patch or if it was a fan made thing. I remember I always had to like hunt for that scenario.
There were a lot of fan-made things, but I don't think that was one of them. I think it was because they have a whole cinematic of the screen getting darker and you hearing like crickets and stuff. Like it didn't, to me, it didn't feel like a fan-made thing. I think it was official, but one of the things is, and I didn't know this till I was doing some research for this particular episode, but the Fairfax had actually intended to create, so after Gettysburg was as successful as it was, when they released Antietam, the thought was this was going to be the first of the great battles of Sid Meier's great battles, not campaign, but basically a group of games that were all going to come out, that were all going to be, essentially available on the Fairfax store. So I think the idea was it would only they wouldn't be available at retail. You would buy Antietam, and then you would basically almost like DLC through Fairfax's site. You could buy additional battles. They never ended up doing anything with that. I think they said Antietam was a success, but not nearly the success that Gettysburg was, so it kind of prevented them from doing that. They did release some South Mountain scenarios for free that you could download through the site. But they never really went back to try and release another battle. Fans made a lot of battles later on, like Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, the Wilderness, but it was never, it was almost like Antietam was the start of a new way to do this. And I think by the time Antietam came out, people started kind of saying like, all right, this is a great game, but this engine is a little bit old. It doesn't handle large battles as well. Whereas the Gettysburg scenarios were a little bit smaller, a little more tightly knit. Antietam had literally 90,000 man scenarios, which I think kind of maybe showed some limitations. And for whatever reason, they never ended up doing that, series of battles or whatnot through their site.
Other games, I think, like Sid Meier's Pirates and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know when that came out, but I mean, yeah, obviously Sid moved on to other things.
So the second lineup on my list here, after the last three that I mentioned, and I don't know if you're going to agree with this, but this is one of my favorite Civil War games, and it was a really hard choice for not putting this as number one. And I think the number one is probably just like you said, nostalgia, but also there's a lot of but I'll get into number one in a minute. It's Civil War II by Aged. Or did I say their name right? Aged or Aged?
Aged, I don't know.
But honestly, I remember I ran into the developer at Historicon in Virginia one time, and I interviewed the head guy in charge. And I remember when he was talking about the game, how excited he was, how passionate it was. And I remember they came out with Civil War I, and it was okay. But when they came out with Civil War II, I got my hands on it. I did a review for it. It literally was incredible, and I'll tell you why is primarily because it was such an epic scope. I could do whatever I wanted. There was no tactical battle, but it's completely strategic. It goes from literally Virginia all the way up to Maine to all the way down to Texas, and you got parts of California and the other western states or territories. And the cool thing about this is every time I play it, it's always different. There is no Gettysburg because, the AI doesn't go that far. AI is like, well, instead of Gettysburg, I'm going to invade through Ohio, or I'm going to take an advantage of something that I did stupidly. Maybe I moved a couple of divisions out of Alexandria and they moved on. The game is always, how can you win the Civil War and then go? And you get the resources, you build your generals, you build your brigades. Where do you want to focus on the sea? Cut the Confederacy with currency, or if you play the Confederacy, can you hold out? And I remember I played one scenario, one campaign series as the Confederacy, and I wanted to see, all right, Lee took risks. Lee fought numerous battles with, the 7 Days battles and Antietam and all these other battles that costed him a lot of troops. And I said, well, look, let me dig in. Let me not waste my soldiers in these battles. Let me dig in, fortify Virginia, only attack smaller Union forces, be on the defensive, do like a Longstreet kind of strategy. And I did win. I got very close to losing, but I forgot how I won. I think with foreign pressure, and I smashed, I think, one Union army. They attacked me in Richmond. I remember I fortified Richmond, and if you're defending a certain part for so long, you go from regular entrenchments to fortifications like logs to basically, I mean, extreme World War I type fortifications. And that's what I had when they came at me in Richmond. I had like, I think 30,000, and they came out with me like 80,000, and they hit me literally repeatedly until I had like 5,000 men left. I inflicted, I think, like crazy casualties on them. 2/3 of their 4 men were gone, and I got pushed out of Richmond. I had some troops in Richmond they were about to take, but I think just the loss of like 80,000 men just within 2 weeks was just too much for them. And I got a little pop-up the next turn. It's like, you win. And I love things like that. And I remember that really got me motivated, and it kind of brought back that feeling that I had when I was like in my teens with like sid-meiers-gettysburg, and you're staying up for like 20 hours because you're so motivated. You want to let go of this game. You're addicted, and, you know, drinking Mountain Dew on the side, and, you know, and just grabbing whatever snacks you have because you just want to not stop playing the game. And then that's what I felt like when I played Civil War II. I don't know if you ever got a chance to play it.
I haven't played it. Played some of the other Age-Odd games like that, which kind of make me... those kind of games are difficult for me to play when I know the history really well. Because I just think to myself, like, okay, the AI sees they're taking advantage or whatever, and they're launching an invasion of Illinois. And I just think to myself, oh my God, the only reason they're doing this is because like it doesn't seem to factor in the realities of the day. Like a German invasion, or not German, good Lord, a Confederate invasion of Upper Ohio just because you forgot to put a brigade or two here on the front line. Like that wouldn't happen. There's no way that the AI would act the way that they do a lot of times in those kind of strategic games. And I think those games work better when you're playing as the Confederates on the defensive and the Union has to be the aggressor. I think they don't work as well if you want to play as the Union and expect the Confederates to play, because they act in a way that the Confederates, one, wouldn't, and two, couldn't. And it doesn't really... To me, the game doesn't, and I haven't played this game, I'm just saying Age-Odd games don't do a good job of having the Union act one way because certain things matter to the Union, and having the Confederates act an entirely different way because different things matter to the Confederacy. And that's where I see the disconnect, is the Confederate should have a completely different strategy as the AI than the Union does. And I haven't played this one specifically, so tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't tend to see Age-Odd games do that.
You know, that's a good question. I mean, that's...
And it's not limited to Age-Odd either. So I played a game that if I had to put a fifth game or an honorable mention game in here, it would probably be a game called American Civil War, Fort Sumter to Appomattox, which is this really old game. What might have been a DOS game that I played a long time ago that was more operational about the American Civil War. You basically had to build the armies and try and either conquer the South or, obviously hold the South. And I've got a video on my channel. I'll throw you a link if you want to look at it later. But it's not like hex based, but it's very similar. You have turns, battles occur over, I want to say, like a 2-week period of time. And I always enjoyed playing as the Confederacy, trying to get blockade runners out or things like that. But playing as the Union just felt like the Confederates would send small little armies like all over the map and just kind of be dumb. And it always struck me as the kind of game that works best if the AI's on the offensive and they're the stronger side, but not so much if they've got to deal with the complexities of playing the Confederacy, defending that massive front line with insufficient forces, and largely giving you the initiative to decide where you're going to engage, because the Confederates never really would. But not in a Robert E. Lee kind of way, just in a, all right, we're going to send a brigade to Cincinnati because, well, we could. Like, no, you wouldn't send an unsupported brigade through miles and miles of hostile territory just because. So again, I played a lot of that game, but that game worked really well when you were the Confederates. Didn't really work very well when you were the Union.
I'm looking at a screenshot for that game. I haven't played that one. It looks interesting though. I've played another one from the '90s, and it's by Impression Games called Edward Grabowski's. It's Polish. Oh, that's interesting. The Blue and the Gray. That one I did play. But the one that you mentioned is actually looks really cool. I like the map on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that was my impression of Age-odd games, but you really enjoy Civil War 2. So why don't you talk a little bit about, what can you explain how that game is played? Because I have not played it. Is it the same as all other Age-odd games? Like how do turns react? What kind of things do you have to worry about? Do you have a preference on like who you play, or why don't you just talk a little bit more about it?
Well, I would say the game starts out. The cool thing about this game is very sandbox, and I love that about Age-odd games. Is it plays a lot like other Age-odd games I played, like the War to End All Wars. The cool thing about Civil War 2, and why I think it's the best modern Civil War game that I would ever recommend, is primarily because you can start at any point you want. So if you want to start at Fort Sumter, you can, and the game is every time you click the end turn, it's a 2-week period. I believe it's like 14 or 15 days. So once you click end turn, 15 days go by, and it implements all your moves as well as all the enemy moves. And it's a big map, so you're not going to be clicking end turn every 5 seconds. You're literally you can do either theater. You can do the Eastern, so you don't have to worry about the Western theater, or you can do the Western, not worry about the Eastern. I generally do everything because I like both theaters working with one another. So there'll be a couple of times where, Lee might be, or, Beauregard, whoever might be doing some real damage in the East, and I might have lost a whole corps because I did some stupid strategy that I want to implement, and I'll pull some 2 divisions from the Western theater, put them on railroads, and head them east to bolster my troops there. I like that fluid environment where I can say, all right, damn, I just lost 50,000 men. Washington is, not fortified the way I wanted it to be. Let me pull 30,000 men from Grant's forces in Kentucky, halt the entire invasion of Tennessee because my dumb ass did this. Let me move all the soldiers to D.C. and fortify it. Or there are a couple, like in the last video series I was doing, I decided to see if I can get to Richmond as quick as possible, to be in Richmond by the end of 61. And I'm actually, I posted a video about like a couple weeks ago on it, and I'm getting there. I'm actually pretty good. I kind of like
Don't toot your own horn at all. I'm actually pretty good.
Well, it's the AI, so I'm not like, I'm sure if I was playing against you, you would have saw it and you'd be like, dude, you crazy? But the AI is not, well, AI is AI. They only get so good until we have a little artificial intelligence, a little Skynet running around. Then there might be a challenge. But so basically, I had Beauregard, who is by I believe by Manassas, and I had J.E. Johnston, who's in the Shenandoah Valley. And I was just thinking, I was like, there's nobody by Fredericksburg. I could literally put, I think it was about 20,000 men, which was about half of what Beauregard had in Manassas. I said, all right, let me put these guys on the boats. They're fresh. They're green. They literally just signed their ink is not even dry off their enlistment papers, right? Put them on a boat. I get them down to Fredericksburg. I take the town, and Beauregard freaks out. He starts moving forces down to Richmond. But by this point, he starts moving forces from Manassas, leaving Manassas with like a brigade or even a couple of regiments. I take them out very quickly with my main army from Alexandria, and I just start closing the coffin. And I'm getting pretty good because I'm at Fredericksburg. I'm right across from Richmond. He abandoned Manassas, so my right wing is kind of going around. So I took out all his railroad that goes to the Shenandoah Valley, and I'm going up Hampton Roads. I'm all the way by I think Williamsburg. So I'm coming at Richmond from 3 sides. It's not even August yet, and it's like, man, if I was Lincoln in 61, forget about it. I'm exaggerating here, but it would be impressive. I could take Richmond by end of 61.
Well, I guess I was considering challenging Mr. Little Mini Grant, to a online multiplayer session of this game, but it sounds like I may be ill-advised to do so.
Yeah.
Um,
You would have saw that coming, though. Like you would have saw your flank being open and Richmond being such a target. The AI doesn't see that, I think.
Yeah, does the game do a decent job of like fog of war? Because one of the biggest challenges always was both sides not really knowing where the others were, whether it's Gettysburg with the Confederates not understanding. And it was one of the interesting things is I had a chance to go to Gettysburg within the last couple of weeks, and it was, first of all, it was awesome. But in preparation for going, I read Stephen Sears' book on Gettysburg, and it really came across in a way that some of the other books I've read, including like Fenzes, or however you pronounce it, PFANZ, Gettysburg the First Day. Sears' book really illustrated the point of how the Confederates, or at least Lee, it's presumed that they may have thought the Union Army was not all there after the first day's fighting, that the Union Army may be strung out over the roads, that the entire force wasn't there. And one of the reasons he wanted to move aggressively to attack the Union was the hope or the thought that the army was not at full strength and that he could overwhelm the small portion of it, destroy it, and then turn on whatever was left, when in fact the entire army was there. And what I don't see a lot of Civil War games doing, if any of that I can think of, is doing a good job of making you uncertain about what's there. Now, obviously, Lee didn't have his cavalry at Gettysburg, or at least early on, or some of it was back in the gaps guarding his supply lines. Stuart was cut off. But other battles were like that as well. The Union often and frequently would not move to attack substantially inferior Confederate forces because they didn't think they were inferior. They didn't think it was one brigade guarding Manassas. They didn't think it was, they didn't think Lee only had 40,000 men or whatever, when he would have, they'd think he'd have twice that number, or 3 times that number, depending on the commander. So I wonder if any games that you've come across, or if AJOD does this at all, either, do a good job of making you really guess what is where, and making those kind of decisions to close on Manassas difficult, because you don't really know if you're walking into a trap or walking into, an easy success.
I think with the Civil War too, they did a really good job with I think fog of war. Now, because the reason why this is popping up in my head, why they did such a good job, is there's a lot of times I remember I'm looking at a big Confederate force, and it's like, let's say it would be coming up from in Missouri, and I'll be looking at it, and it looks like to be the size. I'm counting it, and I'm like, okay, so it has this much power. And power would be the equivalent of like troop size. So like it takes in effect troop size, morale, and a couple other, and the health of the unit and stuff like that. And it correlates into a term called power. And so I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, I have 40,000, power of 1,500, and they're at, 1,200. So I'm thinking it's reasonable, close to where my troops are in terms of, size and all that stuff. So I'm like, all right, you know what? I'm not going to invade Missouri. I'm just going to hold off here. I think maybe I was in St. Louis or wherever I was. But anyway, I was looking at this force. I said, you know what, let me hands off. Maybe there's another part of, Tennessee I can go in. Maybe the eastern part of Tennessee I can come down from that with another force and, outflank the Confederates. And it'll be kind of interesting because I'll do that and I'll see the same force over there. And apparently, I guess maybe the way the fog of war is done is I didn't send any spies out to like look actually at that unit. And I'm assuming maybe the game is like saying, yeah, this is what I have here. And it's because there are a couple of cards that you can use to inflate your numbers or to, mask what your forces are. So I'm assuming what the game is doing is say, yeah, this is a massive, big 40,000 man army. Don't you dare touch me or I'll, smack you upside the head. And, do your thinking, when in reality, if you would have sent spies out, you would have saw, hey, this is actually 10,000 troops. The actual real armies on the other side of Tennessee going up into Kentucky, about to squash your 2 divisions. I think a game like Civil War II allows you to do stuff like that. It allows you to disguise your enemy movements, send spies out. You get to screw around with the other player. Even the AI, screwing around with me a couple of times where I seem like, How the heck? And I'm just thinking, is the game cheating? Is it like literally moving a whole army from one state, one side of the country to another in a matter of 2 weeks? That's impossible. Over rivers and all this stuff in the middle of winter, it's not possible. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, no, it probably used its own cards because I could do the same thing. And I think they put a lot of work into this game. And there's only one game above Civil War II that I had that makes the top spot, and it only made it by a hair. And honestly, if this game right here is way old, so I wouldn't recommend this as like, hey, if you want to play a good Civil War game, this is it, because this is just that nostalgia. I would have to say it's Civil War Generals 2. And that's primarily the only reason I love that game is it's nostalgia in terms of what you can do. You had there was a couple of scenarios that were released by fans where you actually can play operational level games. It gave me, I remember I was playing with my buddy one time, and it was a custom-made scenario. And I can never find it online. There's only one site that had it, and I think it was taken down. I might have the file actually on one of my old hard drives. But basically, it gives you all of DC, right, all the way down to around Petersburg. And it like recreates the towns, and it's a massive map. And it gives you the Army of Northern Virginia by brigades, not by regiments. And it gives you the Army of the Potomac, as well as the Army of the James and the Shenandoah Valley Army. And literally you have probably like 50 to 100 brigades that you have to, and units you have to move around. And it's a massive map. And the reason why I love it is because I always wanted a game like this. And I know Civil War Generals 2 gives you battles like Gettysburg, but this one's a little bit more operational level, more strategic, mixed with a little tactical. And you move units, and you can fight at, you can fight at Manassas or Fredericksburg or the Wilderness, and you're actually moving individual brigades. You can actually send 5 brigades to the west to go down the Shenandoah Valley, or, you can't send them by boat, but you can move them by land and try to outflank the enemy. You can do basically Grant's overland campaign in 64. And I always wish that they came out with Civil War Generals 3. And I remember, I think I might have even talked to the developers. I told them, I think I did, but this was maybe 10, 20 years ago, that I told them it would be awesome if you made a game where I even wrote a design document. At one point, I was actually talking to Slytherin about making a game like this, where you would take Civil War Generals 2, you would take a hex-based map that would be massive. It would go from, New York City all the way down to, Georgia and Texas, and where you can zoom in and out, right? You can zoom all the way in, and you can, have your brigades and a hex-based map, and you can see individual houses and towns and stuff like that, and move units accordingly, like Civil War Generals 2. But you could also use your mouse scroller and zoom out, kind of like a Google Maps kind of thing. And as you zoom out, those 15 brigades start molding into one flag. So instead of you having to move 15 brigades all at one time, you can just take the flag and move them to a different part of the map. So they give you a little simplicity. And this game inspired that design document, and really gave me, when I was a kid or even a teenager, just that, like you said, when you're in the 90s and you just want to stay up all night and play games like that. Civil War Generals 2 was that game.
Civil War Generals 2 is on my list as well.
It is?
Yeah. So I have that game as well, and it's another one of those classics that doesn't really translate well into a modern operating system. But, the thing that was awesome about that game is I had played the original. I'd played Civil War Generals 1. And that was a game, I want to say it had 7 scenarios. It had the Manasses, it had Shiloh, Chancellorsville, the Wilderness, Gettysburg. I don't remember what else. Can't remember if it had Chickamauga, but it had a few scenarios, had a little bit of voice acting when it introduced the scenarios. It was kind of interesting. It was this hex-based, turn-based battle or game with individual battles ranging from 20 turns to 120, I think, in the case of Gettysburg. And It's almost like Panzer Corps, but less abstraction, in the sense that you got units that are on a hex, and you move them around, and they fight each other, but there's no real sense of flank. Like, you could hit someone in the rear, theoretically, if you attack them from every side, but if you attack them from what seems to be their rear and not from their front, then they just turn around and shoot at you without any penalty. There's no real flanking that I can tell. So it's not really a tactical game. It's more of like a hex-based, turn-based game where you just kind of mash units together and fight. But the first game is not on my list. The second game is the one you're talking about, Civil War Generals 2, because of that campaign. It had like 30 or 40 different battles that were in it. And it had a Western campaign, an Eastern campaign. It had 4 or 5 battles from Vicksburg. It's the only Civil War game that fights battles out that I'm aware of that allows you to fight the Battle of Vicksburg, or, various components to the Battle of Vicksburg. It was the first Civil War game that I had ever played that really put a serious emphasis on looking at the Western theater, be it Murfreesboro, be it Shiloh, be it Vicksburg, be it Chickamauga. It had a large number of Western scenarios in conjunction with the Eastern scenarios. It had almost every single battle in the 7 Days battles. It was feature-rich in terms of the number of battles it had. And it had this dynamic element, which you see Ultimate General Civil War kind of borrowing, where you had units, they would lose their casualties after the battle. You could use weapons that you captured or money that you earned to buy new weapons, to upgrade weapons for various units, and casualties for units would carry over. But there was no arcadiness of building your own, as much as I love it. There was no arcadiness of building your, turning a 1,000-man brigade into a 2,500-man brigade. No, brigades would steadily get weaker over time based on the casualties that you suffered. And just like the Civil War, you would bleed units out because you couldn't replenish their losses. But it was very well done, I thought, and was one of those games that I've put probably more hours into that game than any other game. Heck, I even have a few videos on my channel where I was able to get it working not that long ago and played through. I think I played through. Did I play all the way through the end of Shiloh? I can't remember how far I played through in the campaign, which, it had the Battle of Blackburn's Ford as kind of like a tutorial, which is like this little skirmish that occurred before Bull Run. But it was a very well done game, and there was supposed to be a third game. I know you mentioned you wish there had been a sequel. So the first game came out and it sold over 200,000 copies. The second game came out, it sold over 500,000 copies, which again today is like, well, a lot of games sell millions. The 200,000 copies that Civil War Generals 1 sold in 1996 made it the 25th best-selling PC game in the world that year. Then, again, the second one came out, sold over 500,000 copies. It was interesting. I was reading a couple of comments in some forums, and someone who was in Germany was talking about how they didn't get sid-meiers-gettysburg over there. All they had was Sierra's Civil War Generals 2. Which is, again, interesting to think of that game distributing or publishing further or more wide-ranging than a game by the divine himself, Sid Meier. I mean, when you think about strategy games, he's kind of at the pinnacle of game developers. But and they had started working on Civil War Generals 3. But I guess they determined that the amount of money that it was going to cost for whatever they were trying to do and the amount that they projected being able to sell, it just wouldn't have made a lot of economic sense. I don't think it would have lost money, what they said, but it just was, one of those things where their money could have been turned into more efficient projects. And actually, there were a couple of figures, and I need to look them up, but the two key founders of Battlefront, the developers of Combat Mission, one of the best all-time real-time World War II combat games, Combat Mission Beyond Overlord, two of the key figures there who founded that company were actually central in the making of Civil War Generals 2 and left right after making that game to found Battlefront, which I thought was really interesting.
Wow. Are you familiar with, do you know what the actual Civil War Generals 3 was supposed to look like? I mean, I can't
find anything on it other than they started it and then they canceled it, I think, in early 2000. So Ultimate General oh my goodness, Civil War Generals 2 and Sid-Meiers-Gettysburg actually both came out the same year in 1997. Civil War Generals 3, I want to say, was canceled in 2000, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia. Yeah, you're right. It was canceled in 2000. Ah, man, that would have been awesome.
So I doubt it would have had that crazy grand strategy element that you wanted it to have, but
Yeah, that would. Man, that's the thing though. Like I think nowadays, I think back then was really difficult making a PC game, especially I think it's Civil War or any type of strategic war game because it was hard to find outlets for it. Because you have to not only marketing. It's much more difficult back then, but also just finding places to send the game. You couldn't mass produce it, and there was not a lot of outlets. But nowadays, you got Steam, you got the internet is basically taking over everything. So you can go to Slitherine.com or MatrixGames.com, and boom, you got yourself hundreds, if not thousands of probably hundreds, not thousands, but hundreds of war games. So I feel like the time is now, like if people wanted to make, their ultimate, strategy Civil War game, I think like nowadays, especially like, the people I run into when I was at, I think was it a conference in New York with The Verge. And I remember I was talking to a bunch of people from Wall Street Journal and, and people like that. Remember like people always mentioning how like nowadays, like, things are going to get much more easier in terms of coding, and that's the Apple app market is just going to like balloon even more because everybody's going to be able to code. Coding is going to get so much more simpler that basically everybody and their mother is going to be like, oh, I can code a game just like that. And it's that easy to pick up. And you can see in Apple keynotes, I was just watching the last iPhone 8 keynote, and they were talking about, or maybe it was the one before that, they were talking about how like, a mother was able to code, and she was just like, well, I'm a mother, and I help my kids in the morning, but I also code this application. It's just like, wow, okay, so apparently it's not as hard as it used to be. I hope a lot of people are interested in strategy war games. They're like, I want to make my own game and take it up, because I would love to see what people can develop, because I need to sink a couple more hours into a couple new Civil War strategy games. We're getting low on well, I mean, we have the Ultimate General Civil War that just came out, but I don't think anything's coming up, right?
I'm not sure. Not that I'm aware of anyway. But yeah, I mean, so where are we here? So is that your whole list then? Have you gone through all of your games?
Yeah, so going from 5 to 1, I would say, Ultimate General Gettysburg, Ultimate General Civil War, Sid-Meiers-Gettysburg, Civil War 2, and Civil War Generals 2 would have to be my top 5 best Civil War games that I've ever played in my life.
So I've got one additional that you haven't mentioned. So I only came up with 4, but I did a little bit differently. So my number 4 was Ultimate General Civil War. I didn't want to pick 2 of the same developer or of the same series for my list. So Gettysburg or Civil War are almost interchangeable. I think that that ability to have that really long campaign, even though there are weaknesses to it, the ability to create your own group of units that you grow attached to, upgrade their weapons over time, that made it number 4 to me, made it over Ultimate General Gettysburg, the Game Lab games that I went with. My number 1, as I mentioned, and I'm doing this in a weird order for a reason. So number 4 was Ultimate General Civil War. Number 1, as I mentioned, was Sid-Meiers-Gettysburg. Number 2 was Civil War Generals 2. Number 3 is the game I have not mentioned yet, and you have not mentioned either, and that is Scourge of War Gettysburg. So Scourge of War Gettysburg, and I'm lumping Scourge of War and Take Command in together. But I think if you look at Take Command, you'll see this game takes a lot of what was good about Sid-Meiers-Gettysburg. It was not at the high level that Ultimate General approached it. It was at a more micro level, but it took a lot of sort of the detail, the authenticity, and rather than taking the Ultimate General approach of kind of abstracting things and making it simpler, it made some things more complex. It's a real-time game, and in the case of Scourge of War Gettysburg and Take Command, which was the series before it, they're real-time Civil War simulations that put you in the shoes of a particular general in a given number of scenarios. There's no dynamic way that battles play out. You don't see linked battles per se. There's a few, but not many. You don't see a lot of alternative history. They have a few that are scripted, but it's not sort of the evolving nature that Sid Meier's has. But what it does have that I don't think I've seen any other Civil War game do, and this is what really makes it special to me, is it puts you in the shoes of an individual commander in a much larger battle. None of these other games that we've talked about do that. So what I mean by that is there are scenarios in the series where you are put in charge of a brigade of soldiers. But you're not the only ones fighting on the battlefield. There might be a corps-size engagement going on around you, and you are commanding just one small piece of it. The Take Command, 2nd Manassas has a good one of these where you're commanding Early's brigade at the Battle of Cedar Mountain. You're on the Confederate, sort of on the right flank of what you can see. The line actually goes further east, but you're kind of in the middle of the field. And all of a sudden, the Union rush out of this forested line and crush the Confederate left flank. Off to your left. They're not attacking you. They're attacking off to your left. And you get a courier that rides up to you and tells you, here's your orders from General Jackson. You need to hang on. You have to reverse the situation here. You have to hold your position in the line until I can bring up reserves. And sure enough, you figure it out. You kind of just hang in there against overwhelming odds. You've got to refuse your flank because the enemy's coming down on you from the left because they've already crushed that side of your line. Meanwhile, you've got to keep some brigades pointed forward because they're coming out of the woods toward you as well. And then all of a sudden you see these other troops start marching up down the road to your left. And they're General Jackson and the rest of his reserves coming up to save the day. But this game puts you in the shoes of an individual commander in the way that I don't think I've seen any other Civil War game do it. Sid Meier's comes close, but it's not in the sort of, you don't feel like, oh my goodness, this is who I am. You just feel like, here's the scenario and I'm within it. But Scourge of War and Take Command do that in a way that no other games that I've seen do. They put you in the shoes of someone who's just a cog in the machine. There's division-sized battles where there's a whole corps battle going on and you command one division. There are corps-sized battles where you're the only commander, but you're kind of taking things from a top-down approach. You can do things like send couriers. That's kind of one of the other cool things about this, is it assume, depending on the difficulty level you set it at, you don't have to do this, but you can require that all your orders have to be relayed by couriers. So you click on a unit, you tell it to go here, but it won't start moving instantly. Instead, a little digital courier will manifest itself where your character is, because you are represented on the map by whatever character you are in a battle. Your little digital character will sort of form itself and ride off to the unit that you gave the orders, and then once it arrives, the unit will start moving. But that courier can be killed on the way as well. So it kind of borrows from combat mission, where you have the delayed way that orders are implemented. It visualizes it. And it also kind of borrows from role-playing games, where depending on the scenario and who you are, it very much feels like you're one commander. You're a brigadier general in this massive battle going on, and you've got to figure out how you actually are going to respond to these orders and how you carry them out, but you're not the only thing going on. And to me, that's what makes the Take Command and Scourge of War series really special, and I think it kind of culminates at Gettysburg, at least in terms of the Civil War battles. I'm not going to really talk about Scourge of War Waterloo, because first of all, it's a Napoleonic battle, and while I had no part at all in Scourge of War Gettysburg, I did play a role as a tester in Waterloo, so I won't speak to that. But what I will say is that, in my view, and this is one of the things that led me to volunteer, to ask Norb if I could test the game or help with Scourge of War Waterloo, was that this game had really captured me in a way that not a lot of games do, and that's because of this sort of way it immerses you in being General Hood and being, General Solomon Meredith in command of the Iron Brigade at Gettysburg. And it was special in that way, and that's why it's, on my list.
I agree with you on that. I think Scourge of War, Gettysburg, and their whole series, besides having, I just got to mention this one thing, their box art was awesome. I remember when I was at Historicon, I was like, damn, I already own the game, and I was just like, I really want to pick up this box art because it looks beautiful. Also, just to point out, I saw on Slytherin's website, I saw it earlier today, I want to point this out. They're having this awesome thing that I'm actually going to do where you can receive the box edition of any game that you bought, digital copy. You could pay for as little as $10. You can actually get the box art. And I don't know about you, but I'm a big box art kind of guy. I really love just putting them on a shelf. I'm like, damn, I love that game, and I enjoy playing it. And it kind of reminds me also to pick up the game and start playing it up again. And I was like, man, I haven't played that game in a while. But
what really made me think about it was my trip to Gettysburg. And I know that's not necessarily the topic we were kind of chatting beforehand, but I had a chance to go to Gettysburg a couple of weeks ago. Never been to Gettysburg. Never really been to any other Civil War battlefields. I went to Perryville once. I was like 14. It was in the middle of a road trip. We stopped for like 2 hours, and it was just kind of this field, and there weren't really many monuments. And have you been to Perryville?
No. That's in where is it? That's in
Kentucky.
Yeah, but I remember there was that where I was thinking McClellan, but it's not McClellan. Was it Pope that was in charge there?
No, it was Bragg versus Buell.
Oh, okay. And I remember that was one of the battles where Buell, I think, showed some actually, competence.
Yeah, sort of. It was an indecisive affair. It was part of probably the Confederacy's most successful invasion of the North, the invasion of Kentucky. But the battlefield was kind of, first of all, I didn't know as much of the history about Perryville as I do about Gettysburg. I was a lot younger. We were kind of racing in and racing out. It didn't seem to be terribly well preserved. There was like one fence line that I remember them kind of taking us to and talking about it. That was about it. Which was the polar opposite of my experience at Gettysburg. I mean, so I got to Gettysburg. I only had really one full day there, but I was there for parts of 3 days. Showed up. The sun was setting. It was already, I checked into my hotel. By the time I got out toward the battlefield, and I was just kind of walking around, I was staying at the Gettysburg Hotel, so downtown in that center square of Gettysburg. So I walk out, and the sun's setting. The sun's actually already down. It's kind of dusk, and it's like, all right, well, I'm not really going to see the battlefield here. So I spent some time just walking around the cemetery, specifically the National Cemetery portion, the portion that was commemorated and opened by by President Lincoln with the Gettysburg Address, and walking around, these simple white tombstones, the monument to Louis Armistead, all as dusk quickly becomes night. And it was just, it is so well preserved. You can still feel even the nature around you, just the huge hum of the crickets at night. It's just kind of eerie walking through that cemetery at that time of night, but also kind of, it kind of gives you goosebumps. It was like, oh my goodness, this is my first time ever really being to a battlefield where I can reminisce and understand what happened, but also experience this trip, and it was really special. So spent a little time there, walked back to the hotel, turned in early, and I will say Gettysburg is a special town. I know you've been there a few times, but it's not just a battlefield. It's not just a historical sort of touristy town. Like, it's trendy, and maybe it's because they've got a small little university there as well. But there's got outdoor beer gardens. They've got a ton of bars, a ton of little restaurants, some really good beer there. Just kind of walking through the town, it's kind of a lot of fun. And at night they've got a lot of touristy things going on, like ghost tours and other things like that too. But it was really cool. They even had, I think, an outdoor beer garden that was thematic of the 1860s, which is kind of funny. But people in 1860s outfits or whatever serving old authentic alcohol or whatever, or they claim it was anyway. So yeah, went in, turned in, woke up early at 5 a.m. Went out to East Cemetery Hill, and kind of saw the sunrise over Culp's Hill. And I spent the better part, this whole day 2 of the trip, I spent the better part walking the Union Fishhook. Walked from East Cemetery Hill to Culp's Hill, around Confederate Drive, back into town, then back out to Cemetery Ridge, and south toward the Round Tops. I walked about 20 miles that day. You can do the battlefield via car, but I had a bit thing on, and according to that anyway, I walked 20 miles, and it was just a tremendous experience. Getting to see the views from Little Round Top, getting to see the angle, all of this. The only thing that kind of sucked was I didn't bring an extra power pack, so my phone was dying around 5 o'clock because I had taken so many pictures on the Round Tops, and I wanted to get some sunset pictures because it was my last night there, so I didn't actually end up getting to move forward to look at the Devil's Den. I raced back to the hotel, charged it for a bit, got back to the angle by the time sunset occurred, and got some pictures there, which was nice. But then I didn't really have another day to look at the Devil's Den or the wheat field. I got a quick glimpse of the peach orchard before I left, but I didn't have time to stick around to see more.
I'm good. Go ahead.
It was a special experience. I didn't see any of the day one fighting areas, which kind of sucks. I'm from Wisconsin, so would have liked to see where the Iron Brigade slugged it out, the railroad cut, all of that. But it was special. And if you haven't been to Gettysburg, not that we're being paid to advertise for Gettysburg, although if the Civil War Trust wants to pay us to advertise, by all means, we are accepting checks, donations, whatever you want to give us. It was just a great experience, and it's one of those things where it's like, oh damn, now I have to go back. I've got to see the rest of this, and I've got to, I want to go back there. I want to see some of the other battlefields as well. I mean, this is, again, I've been a Civil War buff for 20 plus years now, and it's one of those things where not a kid in a candy store, but you're finally there and experiencing and seeing the sights and the sounds of these places that you've read about forever, it seems like. And it was truly a special experience. I'm guessing the other battlefields aren't as well preserved or maintained as Gettysburg. I'm guessing it's kind of like, it's like seeing a world-class film probably, and then going into a B film and expecting the same result if you go to other battlefields. I'm just guessing, but it was worth every minute of it. I wish I had maybe even a full week to devote to just spending some time there.
And I think you need a full week at Gettysburg. I go about 5 times a year, and every time I go there, and especially if you go for the reenactment, you have to be there for 6-7 days. There's more stuff to do in Gettysburg than there is in Disney World, because if you go for the reenactment, you got to go to the reenactment 3 of those 7 days. The museum will take you a full day from 8 a.m. probably to 5 p.m. There's that much stuff in the museum.
Which I didn't even touch on the museum. I didn't even go. I went there to buy a hat at the museum, but that was it. I didn't go into any of the exhibits or anything. I just didn't have the time.
But you saw it though, it was pretty huge.
Yeah, I mean, well, it was also new. I think the marker on the building said it was built in 2003.
Yeah, it's pretty recent, because the old one was actually the old one. I think it was still in operation until 2005, 2006. I remember my ex-wife and me visiting there a couple of times. But it's brand new. It's a beautiful one, and the Gettysburg Foundation runs, I believe, that museum. They let the National Park Service have a section of it. And Gettysburg is better preserved than most ones that I've been to, because I go to a lot of ones in Virginia and Pennsylvania and, and everywhere, and Maryland and Antietam and stuff like that. But, the one thing I will say is I joined the Civil War Trust after visiting these battlefields, because the thing that really got me, thing that really pissed me off was that I see local businesses, not businesses, but corporations coming in and, slapping a freaking McDonald's right in front of a national battlefield. It really is, it's a real tragedy when you are on a battlefield and you're trying to understand, what's going on, pay homage to the soldiers that died there, and you see McDonald's across the street or Wendy's behind you, and people honking the horn. You're like, why the heck would you put this here? And the Civil War.
Hey! Wendy's is fine. Wendy's can be in the middle of the angle for all I care.
Chili's, though. I will have to admit that.
Actually, it's funny you said that because I got a picture of. It's not like in the field where picket charge happened, but if you're walking kind of out, I don't know if that's the Baltimore Pike or whatever road. Maybe it's the Emmitsburg Road. If you're walking out of the park, like just kind of to the right toward downtown, but maybe a few hundred yards from where the Angle Cemetery Ridge area is, there's a sign that says like Historic Gettysburg and has an arrow pointing to the right. And I got a picture of it because literally like just to the right of that sign on the other side of the street, there's a McDonald's and then a KFC. So it's like Historic Gettysburg, McDonald's and KFC.
Because it was there in 1863.
Right. Well, little did you know, Colonel Sanders played a vital role in throwing back the Confederate hordes under the leadership of General Ronald McDonald.
But it goes to say that, like, and that the one thing I was having a little bit of an argument, a little tiff when I was in the I usually go to O'Rourke's, which is on Emmitsburg Road. I was having a beer there, and some guy who lives on the outskirts of the city, and he's local. And I think I was talking to a waitress because I always I go there 5 times a year, so they know me a little bit. So I'm having and we were talking about like the casino or something like that they were supposed to put there, and it's like third or fourth time they were going to build a casino there. Me and him were kind of arguing about, like, he was saying, yeah, I'm like, they should put a casino right by Cemetery Ridge, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. It would create jobs. I'm like, are you kidding me? You would put a casino right on top of Cemetery Ridge. It's like, yeah, it's the battlefield's there, but, there were other things, before it was a battlefield. The army was here. I'm like, yeah, but I'm from Brooklyn. I'm like, let me tell you something. Like, casinos only do bad things, okay? And he was just like, and I'm like, have you ever been to Atlantic City? I'm like, no offense, but, and I apologize if you live in a casino town, but like, scum of society hangs around casinos. Let's be honest. I know a lot of people that go to casinos and they sell. Long story short, it's not a good place where people hang out. And, there's a lot of crime that spurs up. And who wants, like, a casino right on top of, like, a national battlefield where, the 50,000 American casualties happened? And why would you do that? It's like a disgrace to the land. You might as well just, that's like you going to the land and urinating on it and taking a shit and saying, hey, this is what I think of the people who fought here. To me, that's the way it looks. That's the way I look at it. And, and
well, before you added that last bit, I was going to say, well, how do you know I didn't urinate and take a shit in the middle of Culp's Hill?
I have more faith in you. Plus, there's porta potties everywhere. I noticed they've been flooding the battlefield with that.
Yeah, but I was trying to, go for the whole all-natural 1863 look. Those porta potties weren't there in 1863.
That's true. That is true. I will give you that. It's not like they had porta potties back in 1862.
It was the soldier experience. I needed to understand what it was like.
I wonder if the reenactors do that.
Oh, God. Yeah, there was actually a couple of people in I think there were Confederate uniforms near Sudley Springs or whatever that is, like on the right side near Culp's Hill.
Oh, really? Oh, so they were doing one of those reenactment weekends.
It wasn't really reenactment per se, but it was just like, I don't know if they just decided, like, we're going to just show up and pitch a tent. Like, I don't know. There's like 20 guys.
But, the cool thing I like about, like, and if any people are listening to this, the one thing I would recommend is become a member of the Civil War Trust. It's $30 a year. And I know it's not, it's a bit of money, but, these guys, the Civil War Trust, every time I go to Gettysburg or Antietam or all these other places, I always see plaques. And it's always, this part of the land is preserved by the Civil War Trust. And I always talk to the park rangers. I'm like, I want to know what is like does the Civil War Trust get involved in your battlefield? And every single one from every single Civil War battlefield I went to, all the ones in Virginia, Pennsylvania, Antietam, they say, oh yeah, forget about it. They just bought up all that land. They're going to give it to us in the next year once it goes through Congress. Apparently it has to go through Congress or something like that to add it to national park land. But they just bought all that land. They're going to give it to us. And every battlefield I go to, they do that. And in Gettysburg, they just recently tore down a brewery and a hotel, like a little shanty hotel, where Lee had his kind of headquarters, but not really his headquarters. It was just he went there. I guess that's where, if you ever watched the movie Gettysburg, that's the actual house. They tore it down because they want people to actually see the house the way it's supposed to be in 1863. So they're like, there's a brewery next to it and there's a hotel next to it, but let's just get rid of it because we want people to feel immersed. We want people to feel what it was in 1863. And I love stuff like that because you know what? Put the freaking hotel on the other side of the hill, or put it a couple of miles down the road, get in your car, drive over to it. It doesn't need to be next to these historical battlefield areas where people, shed their blood, and that's my own personal thing. And one cool thing I love about Aged in Civil War II is if you buy the game, it says donation. Every purchase there's a donation to the Civil War Trust. So I thought that was kind of cool that they did that.
Oh, that's kind of neat.
Yeah.
Do you know how much?
No, but I remember when I bought the game, I was just like, that's how I found out about the Civil War Trust. I bought the game and I was just like, it said proud supporter of the Civil War Trust, and it was like part of the press release. It says donation to Civil War Trust. I'm like, who the heck are they? And that's how I became a member.
Oh, kind of neat. Yeah, I guess one of the other things with Gettysburg that helped is, and I didn't know this till I was reading Sears' book, but basically, like in 1863, almost shortly after the battle occurred, there was some really rich guy from Gettysburg who bought up a bunch of the land, to try and preserve it in remembrance of the battle. I don't know everything he bought, but he bought a lot of the major locations, which in turn helped prevent some of the development that occurred on other battlefields before there was really a preservation effort, underway.
I just don't understand why, I even over here in there's a Yorktown battlefield, American Revolution in 1781. I remember I was talking to, whatever tour guide there was, and they were telling me, this was a golf course at one point, and then maybe a junkyard or there was some other thing that they also made it into. And I was just like, why? Why here? I don't understand. There's a whole forest behind us and nothing happened, but you got to build a golf course right here. I just don't maybe it was not in America's interest back then to preserve, but I don't know if this allure that we have to save our history is a recent thing or
I think it is relatively. I mean, I don't know. There's probably some studies or whatever that have been done, but I don't get the sense that there was anyone thinking about, all right, we need to preserve battlefields in the 1880s or 1890s or even the early 1900s. My assumption would be that really didn't start till, I don't know, 40s, 50s, 60s, probably sometime in that period of time. It's interesting because my mom had some photos she was sharing with me. She went to Gettysburg in the 70s, and she shared a few as well. But, there used to be, I think at one point, there was a McDonald's in the middle of the field where Pickett's Charge happened. There was just, a lot has changed.
Yeah, I noticed there's a lot more corporate. When I went to Gettysburg in the 90s with my dad, I remember you driving in. The only thing I remember there that I recognized when I was a kid, and I was just I'm driving through, and a kid from the city is just I'm expecting businesses everywhere, all this stuff. I'm driving in, and it's just wow, we're really in the sticks. I remember driving in. I think the only thing I remember seeing was oh, there's a Domino's here. And I was that's the only thing I recognized. Everything else was local. And now if you drive to Gettysburg, you probably saw there's 3 or 4 McDonald's and, KFC everywhere. And I mean, it's just, and a super Walmart, not even a regular Walmart, it's a super Walmart.
I didn't see any Walmarts. It was a beautiful drive though, too. It was kind of cool because I got a rental car and I think I'd asked for a full size, and somehow I flew into Baltimore. And they basically oh, shoot, we don't have any full sizes. Just take whatever you want. And I was like, wait, what do you mean? Just take whatever you want. It's there's a bunch of luxury SUVs, but I don't want to be driving that around a 200-year-old town or whatever. So I ended up taking a Mustang and driving a Mustang up.
Oh, nice.
That was,
He drove in style.
Yeah, I guess. I was like, all right. I was like, you're not charging me anymore, are you? Like, no, it's on us. It's like, oh, okay.
Wow,
that's cool.
That's pretty cool. Did you send him? What did your wife say?
my wife was like, send me pictures. Like, okay.
Did you drive that up to Boston?
No, which is kind of the unfortunate thing. I decided before the trip that I was just going to fly up to Boston after I was done at Gettysburg. But if I had, then I would have had the Mustang for a whole week rather than just like 2 days.
Yeah, that would have been cool. You driving over.
Although, honestly, I would not have wanted to drive that around Boston. I'm glad we didn't have a car there.
Playing Bad to the Bone in the background.
Sure. But I walked around the whole battlefield more or less, which was I enjoyed it. It was, I think, a more intimate experience, but it was also sort of one of those things where, certainly they've got roads and trails around the whole thing if you want to drive it instead.
I give you a lot of props though that you walk around because it's very hot there. Not only that, but it's a big battlefield, and I notice a lot of tourists that go there. I walk around the battlefield myself, and I'm walking around. I see people that don't even get out of their car. I mean, like most of the time, they're not even lowering their windows, and it's just like they're like slowing down. They don't even get out of the car. They just like looking around from their car, and they just stay a couple minutes and they drive to the next. It's just like you're missing the whole experience. It's like you're literally in your car the whole time.
I could understand it if maybe you drove up and all you had was like an afternoon, or they do have an auto tour, which certainly would make things easier. In retrospect, I should have driven the Mustang around. It was it had the soft top. I could have put down the top and just driven that around. But I enjoyed walking around. I think it was a more personal, sort of intimate experience. But I can understand, especially, a lot of people there were more elderly. Like if you're not in a position to be walking. I walked 20 miles, and I'm not the kind of person who exercises much. And oh my God, my feet still feel like they might be hurting from that. It was. I don't walk 20 miles. I don't walk 20 miles. I'm not, a super. I'm not. I'm reasonably good shape, but I'm not like someone who exercises a ton. So it was tough, but I enjoyed it. So I'm not going to begrudge someone for not walking, but for me, it was a good experience.
Do you ever, next time you go there, next time you go to East Coast, are you planning to include any other locations? Like if you had to choose one other place besides Gettysburg, where would that be?
If I had to choose something other than Gettysburg?
Gettysburg, and you're like, okay, I want to hit one more place, and
then... that's a good question. I don't know. That's a tough one. I wouldn't mind going to Yorktown and then also jumping over to Norfolk and seeing the USS Wisconsin, the battleship there.
I feel bad. I've been here 5 years. I haven't seen that. It's literally 15 minutes down the road.
You should really go see it because it's the greatest battleship ever because it's named after the state of Wisconsin. I don't know. Honestly, I want to go back to Gettysburg, I think, before I go see anything else. I want to see the whole field. I want to give it a couple more days, and I want to, see July 1st. I want to see the Iron Brigade stuff. I didn't get to see the Irish Brigade other than the father who was kind of on Cemetery Ridge who gave the benediction or whatever. But I want to see the whole thing, and I want to go back. And my next sort of just whatever vacation, I think we'll be going there and spending some more time. I want to spend some more time in town. I didn't really get a chance to see the town all that much. I walked through it, sure, but there's a ton of neat little shops, little restaurants. It's just I want to go back there. That's kind of what's on my plate right now.
Did you stop by the Blue and the Gray pub?
I walked by it. I didn't actually stop in.
Okay. Yeah, that's one thing you gotta do. And the cool thing is if you do go back, or when you do go back, Antietam is not that far away. I remember driving to Gettysburg, and I said, let me stop by Antietam. It's only like 30, 40 minutes away. So,
well, actually, yeah, one of my original plans had been fly in, go to Antietam, spend a day at Antietam, then drive up to Gettysburg and spend a day there. But I ended up going to Boston a day earlier, and based on discussions with you, you didn't think I'd be able to see Gettysburg in one day, and you were right.
Yeah.
But I would like to go see Antietam. How well is Antietam preserved? Reasonably well, or what kind of ship is that in?
I know the Civil War Trust saved some land there recently. The town is very historical. I remember I was talking to a local, and I've been there in Tina maybe 3 or 4 times. And I remember I was sitting down, I was in a bar, and I remember, I forgot how we got on the conversation, but basically talking about like, I said, I like that you guys preserve the town. He says, yeah, maybe a little bit too much. And I remember asking him, I was like, well, what is that supposed to mean? He says, well, like the town council is very history and like small town focused. He says that we even had like one gas station in town, and they figured, well, we don't like the gas station being there. It kind of like has a sign of like Shell there, and we don't feel that small towny kind of historical kind of thing. So they tore down the gas station. So he was kind of pissed. He was like, I have to drive 20, 30 minutes out of town to the nearest gas station just to get gas. And, I'm not going to argue with him because, it's his town, whatever, But I was just thinking, I was like, I do like that they're making this town,
No automobiles allowed. Only horse and buggies for you, sir. That might be a little much, but how's the actual battlefield portion? Not so much the town.
But the battlefield is like literally, you could literally walk from the visitor center to the, it's actually probably even a shorter walk from the main battlefield visitor center to the town. I think like it's a mile or two. So it's probably even closer than, going from Gettysburg Town Square to the battlefield. Well, technically,
that was the one thing about Gettysburg I thought is the battlefield center was located in a weird place. And to be honest, I didn't feel the last day I had already checked out of my hotel, so I parked there. But I thought it would have been more convenient just to walk from the hotel than it was to walk from the battlefield center. They didn't have a good way to get to the far Union left flank. They kind of like, oh, you're going to come out here on the angle. It's like, well, great, but I've seen that twice already. I'd like to go somewhere else, but now I've got to walk down the whole damn line again to get over to the peach orchard.
Yeah, it's a bit of a walk. The museum used to be right inside the Gettysburg, right on the cemetery ridge. It was like literally where Meade's statue is, right next to there, and they tore it down. I think.
I'm glad they moved it because I think it's the way it all is structured. I think is really well done. But anyway, maybe Antietam would be my next trip, but I'd like to go back to Gettysburg too. So I don't know. Anyway, what do you? I don't think you're drinking anything tonight, are you?
No, I'm still recovering from getting a little bit ill. So tomorrow I'm going back to beer. I did have a lot to drink before I got sick. I didn't get sick because of it. I don't think I got sick because of the drinking.
I drank a lot, man, but I don't think that's why I was sick.
When I drink, I only drink Dos Equis.
And boy, do I drink a lot of it.
Yeah. You sound like the most interesting man in the world from that commercial.
I don't drink often, but when I do, I drink 30 beers at once.
It sounds exactly like him too.
Sure, I'm horrible at those things. I am drinking a New Glarus Spotted Cow. It's I've had it before. We've been talking on the channel, but it's just kind of I think it's a corn-based Pilsner. It's kind of a sweet, sort of easy drink. Full-bodied beer from a craft brewery called New Glarus in Wisconsin.
Nice. Ooh, I like that.
No scotch for me tonight.
I was kind of surprised. I was like, drinking a beer. That's interesting.
Need to cut back on the scotch.
The thing that drives me nuts about beer, though, is like I went overboard earlier this week. I had like 8 or 9 beers, and I'm like, I went on the weight scale. I'm like, why the heck did I gain 1.5 pounds? And I'm like, and then I think a couple of days later, I had like 8 beers, and I'm like, okay, why did I gain another pound? I'm like, this is ridiculous. And I look at
you should stop drinking like 8 beers at once. Just to the liquid alone has got to be over 1 pound.
I know. I was just like, and I connected the dots. It was like, apparently the beer that I drink is 250 calories each. So I had 8. So that was like 2,000 calories. I'm like, wow, that's all my calories for the day.
Well, one of my friends always says, beer has food value, but food has no beer value.
That's true.
I mean, you're basically drinking liquid wheat. So,
Yeah, you're right.
All right. Well, we've almost hit the 2-hour mark. This has been a rather adventurous podcast episode. We've been rambling for the last half an hour. But I hope everybody has enjoyed episode 18 of the Single Malt Strategy podcast. This is, looking at some of our favorite Civil War games of all time. And I think it's reassuring to see that so many of those games, or two of them in particular from the Ultimate General side, and one, on my side from the Scourge of War side, are such recent additions. I know Sid Meier's is 20 years old, Civil War Generals is 20 years old, but actually AJOT as well. So 3 out of your 5 games were new games-ish within the last couple of years, and likewise, 2 of my 4 games were games that you can still purchase today without setting up a virtual machine and can run. So I think that's reassuring from the state of Civil War games. But I don't know, unless you have any last thoughts, Sean, I think we might wrap it up here.
No, I'm good. I hopefully for our next podcast, I do have a couple of games I wanted to throw into the mix that I'm reviewing now, but I'll say that for next podcast.
Yeah, nothing Star Trek related and whatever about the new TV series.
Watch Star Trek Discovery. I forgot to mention that. I just watched the first 2 episodes. It's amazing. You have to get CBS All Access to watch both episodes, but this is a free week trial, so why not? Forget about it. It's
is that CBS's attempt to have a Netflix?
Yeah.
No, boycott CBS. Don't watch Star Trek. It's not worth it.
It's
you know what? Protest Star Trek. Tell everybody that you want to take it off the air right now.
It's a great first 2 episodes. I was very impressed. It's kind of like Star Trek. It's darker than Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So if you like Star Trek Deep Space Nine, how dark it was, and how it's kind of like almost like Walking Dead meets Starship Troopers. It's very dark.
In space, the zombies can't hear you scream.
No, they can, but they can still bite your head off.
All right. Well, anyway, guys, feel free to watch that or not. I don't really care. Anyway, until next time, guys, this is Matt and John saying thank you for watching. Well, not really. Thank you for listening, and we're out.
See you guys.